Hello, and welcome to episode 9 of A Pod About a Pod, a podcast about podcasts featuring commentary, critique, and sneak peeks of a different show every episode to help you learn more about your favorite podcasts and discover new shows to love. I'm your host, Jordan Pierce, and my voice in your ears means that I am back from my summer holiday. I had a lot of fun on vacation, spent too much money, but I did get to listen to some pretty nifty podcasts, and today's episode is all about Code Switch, a show from NPR about race and how it impacts every part of our society, from politics and pop culture to history, sports, and everything in between. Please make sure to listen all the way till the end of the episode for the Peanut Gallery, because I have some exciting announcements about thoughts I'm having for the future, so stay tuned for those at the end. But for now, we're going to jump right in with what to expect. With respect to linguistics, code switching means mixing languages or patterns of speech in conversation. We will learn in quick history how Code Switch got started as a blog before expanding into the podcasting world, and it all began with an essay that writer and eventual co-host Gene Demby wrote titled How Code Switching Explains the World. I am going to read y'all an excerpt from this essay for some additional context, and here it goes. So you're at work one day and you're talking to your colleagues in that professional, polite, kind of buttoned up voice that people use when they're doing professional work stuff. Your mom or your friend or your partner calls on the phone and you answer. And without thinking, you start talking to them in an entirely different voice, distinctly still your voice, but a certain kind of your voice less suited to the office. You drop the G's at the end of your verbs, your previously undetectable accent, your easy southern drawl, or your sing-songy Caribbean lilt, or your Spanish-inflected vowels, or your New Yorker is suddenly turned way, way up. Your rush to get your mom or whomever to hang up the phone in some less formal syntax. Yo, I'ma holla at you later. That's in parentheses. Hang up and get back to work. Then you look up and see your coworkers looking at you and wondering who the hell you'd morphed into for the last few minutes. That right there, that's what it means to code switch. So that was an excerpt from Gene Demby's essay, How Code Switching Explains the World, and that was how Code Switch got its start. With respect to how the name applies to the show, Gene has this to say, and this is another quote. We're looking at code switching a little more broadly. Many of us, subtly, reflexively change the way we express ourselves all the time. We're hopscotching between different cultural and linguistic spaces and different parts of our own identities, sometimes within a single interaction. End quote. Which I just think is very interesting and very apt. I remember learning about code switching a little bit in AP Psych, and it's cool to have it explained and applied in this way. Episodes of the podcast are released on Wednesdays. Created by a team of 7 journalists of color, the project explores issues of race, culture, and politics in a personal way that flourishes in the audio format. Let's take a listen just in case you don't believe me. Here is your first sneak peek at a little over 3 minutes long of what to expect from Code Switch. For some context, in this episode, the co-hosts are traveling to the University of Texas at San Antonio to go sit in on a class, Race and Identity Through Pop Culture.
Gene.
Shireen.
Code Switch. All right, it's Monday, December 3rd, 9 a.m., and this is the last day of instruction for Race and Identity Through Pop Culture before finals. It's early, and so, if you went to college, you understand there are a few stragglers.
Everybody's on their way.
Do they know who we are?
They running. Someone's almost running. There. Someone's at the bus stop.
Has anyone talked to Luke today?
Oh, Luke.
But once everyone is settled in... Where the rest of y'all from?
You're late. We open things up by asking the students to tell us a little bit about the city they live in. More specifically, something they've noticed about race in San Antonio. It was still early and folks were being shy.
Y'all don't act shy. Like, I know.
It's okay.
Like, y'all talk. Don't act friendly.
But a few people offered up their observations.
What's your name? Marcus McPherson. It was very different for me coming out here because, I'm from Cali, and it's a lot of black people. And even if you're not black, you still have that black culture. And when I came out here, it was just, as far as like the food, there's no Waffle House out here, no, anything like that, no place you gonna get waffles, anything like that, you gotta go get burritos.
And you were saying Killeen has much more black culture.
Yes.
What's the culture of San Antonio, from your observation?
It's a lot of, like, the majority of people here are Mexican people.
My name's Matthew Elizalde. I'm from San Antonio. I lived in the South Side. South Side's full of Mexicans. My grandma lives on the West Side. It's full of Mexicans. I never really go to the East Side that much because I don't have family over there. But I've been there once, and there's a lot of black people. And now I live on the North Side, and there's a lot of white people. So I feel like San Antonio is kind of segregated in a way.
This right here is what college does, or at least is what college is supposed to do. It puts folks like Marcus and Matthew on a campus together, in classes together, with...
So my name's Aaron Rose. I'm from Friendswood, Texas. For my whole life, I was like the only black kid in my class. Like, there's more black kids in this class than there were in my whole school, all of high school and all of junior high. So like, when I first got here, it was like a little bit of a culture shock. I'd never seen so many black people before, but now it's like more comfortable because like before, I couldn't risk being black because I always had a target on my back from the kids at the school because they saw me as a threat or saw me as less than human, and it really tore me down over the course of high school and junior high.
So Aaron's black and grew up around mostly white folks. Mm-hmm. Marcus is black and grew up around mostly black folks. Mm-hmm. Matthew's Mexican-American and grew up around mostly Mexicans and Mexican-Americans. Mm-hmm. They're all from Texas, but they had such different experiences. I can imagine them in psych class, sitting a few rows from each other, maybe saying what's up, maybe, but definitely not talking about race and segregation so candidly.
Right. So here's Matthew Elizalde again, talking directly to his black classmates.
I hear your guys' personal stories. I never really asked anybody that in a way. Like, I never understood, like, what you guys went through, racism and stereotypes and stuff like that, even though I know it exists, but I never got it from a primary source, you know what I'm saying?
What he was just talking about resonates a lot with me as to reasons why I love the Code Switch show. Occasionally, I have these conversations with my friends of color about their personal experiences and race, and it's something that's happening more now. And if anyone wants to, this episode number 9 of my podcast is just as good an excuse as any to talk about our racial identities. I'm white, by the way, extremely European, verified by 23andme.com. But the point is, Code Switch offers a wealth of these stories, these firsthand accounts, and just lived experiences of people of color. And to borrow the phrasing used in the sneak peek and to reference back to that interview itself, these primary sources are what you can expect from Code Switch. And now for a little quick history. Code Switch was launched in 2013 with a $1.5 million grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. As I mentioned already at the top of the episode, it developed first as a blog and contributed stories to a variety of NPR programs. The blog officially started publishing on April 7th of 2013 with Gene Demby's introductory essay that we heard a little bit of earlier, How Code Switching Explains the World. And yeah, I read some of that aloud for y'all. Moving on, 2014, Code Switch won the Online News Association for Best Online Commentary at a Large Outlet. In 2015, the National Association of Hispanic Journalists awarded Shireen Marisol Meraji the Radio Feature Large Market Award for her Code Switch segment, Trustworthy, Loyal, Helpful. This great teacher abides by the Scout's Law. In May of 2016, the Code Switch team launched their podcast of the same name, and Los Angeles Magazine recommended the show as one of the 5 podcasts you must listen to this summer. What is Code Switch up to now in 2020? I hear you asking me through the technology. Here is a sneak peek of an upload released earlier, or last month, I guess now, because it's August, because I'm late with this upload. Surprise, surprise, spoiler alert. But this is a pretty recent episode from Code Switch. It is called Unholy Land, an Arab-Muslim reckoning with racism. After the sneak peek, it'll be time to learn more about Gene, Shireen, and the rest of the Code Switch team with Meet the Talent.
There is a unique situation with American Muslims. They are one of the most racially and ethnically diverse groups in the country, linked by their faith, but also the discrimination they face. But that doesn't mean there isn't anti-blackness, even with at least 20% of American Muslims being black. And El Amin's mosque, like many African-American mosques, it's always sat right at that flashpoint, that intersection of race, culture, ethnicity, socioeconomic background. And in the wake of George Floyd's killing, El Amin's phone, it's been ringing off the hook because those historic tensions he describes, they're igniting. He's getting calls for guidance from non-black Muslims and then angry calls from the black community asking how he's going to handle this. The corner store that called the police on George Floyd, that was Arab American owned. The owner also a Palestinian Muslim like Wadi. By the way, that owner has expressed deep remorse. And then just a few days later, those old, racist, bigoted tweets from Majdi Wadi's daughter, Leanne, they resurfaced.
Holy Land's owner said that he fired his own daughter, saying that he will not tolerate that type of behavior.
That's when Makram El Amin got that call from Majdi Wadi for help.
My family has supported his business for many, many years. Many years. We had a relationship with my mother as well, who also called me in the midst of this, was like, what's going on with this?
But just to be clear, Holy Land isn't a corner liquor store in North Minneapolis, right, with bars on the windows. First of all, it's a few miles away from where you just took us. And if I understand this right, it's a full-service grocery store, among many other things.
Right. It's a family business that serves a multiracial customer base. Most of its employees, people of color, immigrants, famous for its hummus, its halal meat. And they actually don't sell liquor at all. And that's why El Amin says this racist incident makes it even worse. He talked about this with me later.
It was seen to be a departure from that. Like that was a little something better. You know, this person came in, grow their business to a multi-million-dollar business and lots of support from all facets of the community. African Americans, Somali, East Side, whatever, right? Everybody, they were a go-to place.
He says Holy Land was supposed to be different, but now people are questioning that. He told me a lot of African Americans came to Islam attracted to the teachings of social justice, equity, accountability, but they found anti-blackness in non-black Muslim spaces.
The way that they look condescendingly at my people is something that it has been reinforced through society, whether it's through media and all kinds of things. It's been reinforced, and they've bought it. And how I know that? Because how they try to interact and treat us. The Prophet, peace be upon him, talked about your religion is really in your human interactions. It's not what you profess and how flowery and what you dress and how long your beard is, all this foolishness. It has nothing to do with that. It's about how you treat people. But when the stuff hits the fan, right? I need you.
For today's Meet the Talent, I wanted to preface it with all this information is straight from the Code Switch NPR website. So if you want more information about these lovely folks, I'm reading it aloud to you right now, but that is where my source is from. So I'm pretty confident that this information is watertight. And we're going to start with Shireen Marisol Meraji. She is one of the co-hosts and a senior producer of Code Switch. She didn't grow up listening to public radio in the backseat of her parents' car. In fact, she grew up in a Puerto Rican and Iranian home where no one spoke in hushed tones and where the rhythms and cadences of life inspired her story pitches and storytelling style. As a young producer, Shireen found herself in the midst of a wave of demographic changes that she was poised to report on. She understood the nuances of the Latinx community, which she not only was a part of, but studied in college. When she's not telling stories that help us better understand the people we share this planet with, she's dancing salsa, baking brownies, or kicking around a soccer ball. Shireen's partner in podcasting is Mr. Gene Denby, who is an NPR correspondent and the co-host of Code Switch. In his previous role as Code Switch's lead blogger, Gene was awarded an Online News Association Award for commentary. Before coming to NPR, Denby served well, I called him Gene last time, but we'll call him Demby now, served as the managing editor for Huffington Post's Black Voices following its launch. Prior to that role, he spent 6 years in various positions at the New York Times. Demby is an avid runner, mainly because he wants to stay alive long enough to finally see his beloved Sixers win an NBA championship. So I know we've had a couple sneak peeks so far, but I have another sneak peek so y'all get the chance to get to know them just a little bit more. And after the sneak peek, I actually have more deets about the rest of the Code Switch team. So we will get to that afterwards and we'll be moving right along. But here's a sneak peek from the episode Why Do We Still Care About Tupac, with Gene and Shreen discussing their different views.
So on this episode of Code Switch, we're going to talk about Tupac's legacy. I'm Shreen Marisol Meraji.
And I'm Gene Demby. And this week, we're trying to figure out, are we too reverent towards Tupac? It's 20 years since he died, and there's still so much love for this dude. Even though when he was alive, he was full of contradictions, and he was a really, really polarizing figure. And Shreen, obviously, you and I debate about Tupac all the time.
Yes, I love him. You don't.
I do not.
And the Pac I love is that Oakland, California loving, charismatic, goofy Tupac that I get around Tupac.
Oh yeah.
Round and round we go. I mean, that song, for me, it makes up a huge part of my life soundtrack. I grew up in Sacramento, California. I spent my late teens and half my 20s living and working in Oakland. And for me, Gene, Pac was a Bay dude. You know, his mom was a former Black Panther. He was artsy and eccentric. He just seemed hella Bay. And
Hella Bay. Hella Bay.
And, you know, look, if you weren't into the Bay Pac, there was lots of sides to his music. There was the thug life Pac, the deep thinking, prophetic poet, you know, changes, keep your head up Pac. And that's why he might be my favorite rapper of all time. I said it.
Yeah. So I don't feel the way about Pac the way you do.
I know.
I mean, part of this is just like East Coast chauvinism. I was like, you Morky as blisters. That's always what I imagine.
That's more Ice Cube.
But that's what I imagine all of y'all saying on the West Coast all the time.
Oh, okay.
But also, it's important to note here that I was a very, very square 13 and 14-year-old. I was an altar boy. Pac was like this dude who was kind of scary. Like, he scared me in the way that I think he scared like a lot of old Black folks. You know, he got into all these beefs with like civil rights leaders like C. Dolores Tucker and stuff like that. And I think Pac represented this kind of like, I'm doing air quotes here, but like dangerous Black masculinity that I don't think I had a lot of purchase on, you know what I mean? And so I couldn't necessarily like identify with him in the way that I could identify with like a Tribe Called Quest. I liked sort of like more Afrocentric hip hop or whatever.
I like Tribe too.
I mean, yeah,
just because you like Tribe doesn't mean you can't like Pac.
Well, the thing there though is that I liked hip hop that was more subtle, and there was nothing subtle about Tupac, right? And so like even like Biggie, who was like a wordsmith and a really witty dude, right? Like I could understand the way Biggie's mind worked, but Pac was just like raw charisma. I think a lot of his rapping is carried mostly by like his charisma. You know what I mean?
We can agree to disagree, because for me, I you know, Biggie was a great lyricist. I get that. But Pac's lyrics actually hit you in the gut. They make you tear up. They make you feel something emotionally that, in my opinion, Biggie's don't.
So that was a nice example of the rapport that Gene and Shreen have with each other, and a little bit of background info too on how they grew up. And so I felt like that was a really nice sneak peek for Meet the Talent to get a better feel of those two individuals. As I said, I have more info on the rest of the production team at Code Switch. So here we have Karen Grigsby Bates, a senior correspondent for Code Switch. She's a veteran NPR correspondent, and she's covered race for the network for several years before becoming a founding member of the Code Switch team. She is especially interested in stories about the hidden history of race in America and the intersection of race and culture. She was recently featured, in fact, in an episode where Code Switch was discussing, I think the episode is called What is in a Karen or something, or What is a Karen? And of course, Karen, having the name, was featured on the episode, and they talked about the historical evolution of, you know, white women being categorically, you know, discussed in that way. And so like how it used to be a Becky and now it's a Karen. And anyway, it was a really interesting episode. I recommend it because obviously Karens are being talked about a lot right now, and her name being Karen, I thought that that was kind of cool that she weighed in. She oversees much of Code Switch's work coverage of books by and about people of color, as well as issues of race in the publishing industry. A fun fact about her, she is a co-author of a best-selling etiquette book called Basic Black, Home Training for Modern Times, and 2 mystery novels. So as an aspiring novelist myself, I thought that was pretty neat. Leah Danella is Pod X's editor. Remember, if I say Podcast X or Pod X, I'm simply talking about the show being featured in the episode. So today, Podcast X would be Code Switch. Just feel like I'm saying that a lot already. Another fun fact coming at you, Leah actually started out on the Code Switch team as an intern. Makes me want to find an internship at a podcast myself. As an undergraduate at Pomona College, she edited the Africana Studies newsletter, and before joining NPR, Leah worked with the Public Media Commons at WHYY in Philadelphia, where she taught high school students the basics of journalism and filmmaking, which is pretty damn neat. I wish I could have her as a professor. Next up is Steve Drummond, the executive producer of Code Switch and of NPR's education reporting project, NPR Ed. He brings these initiatives more than 25 years experience covering social issues and education, and 20 years at NPR in a variety of roles, including national editor and senior editor of All Things Considered. At NPR, his work has been honored with many of journalism's highest awards, and I'm not going to read them all, but trust me, there are a lot. He holds a bachelor's degree and 2 master's degrees in education and journalism from the University of Maryland. Good for you, Steve. Then we have Kumari Devarajan, another producer on the podcast, and she's reported on stories about Native populations, LGBTQ communities, and issues like incarceration and immigration. She also contributes to the Code Switch blog, and before working on Code Switch, she was part of NPR's It's Been a Minute with Sam Sanders podcast. Kumari grew up in Washington, D.C., and is a proud alumna of Wellesley College. She's been an aspiring biker for the past several years and has recently come to terms with the fact that she's lactose intolerant. Big oof, I feel you on that. I don't know if I could handle that news myself. I'm a picky enough eater and my diet is, limited already. So I don't think I could deal with a dietary restriction on top of that. My heart goes out to you, Kumari. Next is Jess Kung, a production assistant on Code Switch. Previously, they interned with Code Switch and the podcast The Document from KCRW in Santa Monica. They are a graduate from Long Beach State University, where they studied journalism with minors in queer studies and documentary film, ran a campus magazine, and semi-professionally catered student film sets. They also hate swimming. Natalie Escobar is an assistant editor on the Code Switch team, where she edits the blog and the newsletter, runs the social media accounts, and leads audience engagement. I have to say, Natalie, I reached out over email and I did not get an email back. And I'm not trying to throw you under the bus. I'm just saying, hi, hello. I tried to reach out and engage. But anyway, before coming to NPR in 2020, Escobar was an assistant editor and editorial fellow at The Atlantic, where she covered family life and education. She was also a ProPublica Emerging Reporter Fellow, where she helped their Illinois Bureau do experimental audience engagement through theater workshops. That sounds cool. She graduated from Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism with a degree in magazine journalism and Latino studies. Wrapping up with Meet the Talent, there are 2 honorable mentions, the 2 interns that I do want to shout out, and those are Isabella Rosario and Diane Luego. So those are the 2 interns currently at Code Switch. I hope both of y'all find success into the future. It looks like that was a doable route for some of the team, so good luck with that. There's now going to be a quick break, and after that, we're going to return with why it's worth it and discuss why Code Switch is worth the listen. Code Switch offers courageous, challenging content in concise, captivating episodes. This collaboration of multiracial and multi-generational contributors results in dynamic storytelling that can resonate with folks from any background. What struck me most as I was listening through this podcast catalog is how episodes that originally aired in 2014 or 2016 are still so viscerally relevant today. Let me speak for myself. As a white dude, I feel like if I want to participate in these contemporary conversations around Black Lives Matter and systemic racism and all of the other ways that race is relevant to life in America today, then I need to make the effort to educate myself and listen to the voices and perspectives of people outside of my in-group so that I can begin to understand the bigger picture. I experience a lot of privilege in my life. And in addition to being an advocate or an ally, whenever I see the opportunity, I do make an effort to diversify my media consumption in the hopes that my worldview will be broadened by doing so. If you only ever talk to people and listen to people who have the same opinions as you and look like you and have had similar experiences, then that's going to result in a pretty myopic point of view, which is a big reason why I think Code Switch is personally worth the listen for me. And I'm going to get off my soapbox and get back to the podcast with this next sneak peek. It's your last sneak peek of the day, and the episode is called A Weed Boom, But For Whom? And I feel like it demonstrates a lot of what I'm talking about.
The Oakland Equity Program. It's an initiative by the city of Oakland to try to make sure that as the legal weed industry gets going, it factors in the history of racial inequalities that we've been discussing this entire episode.
So here's what Oakland wants to do. It wants to give out permits to sell cannabis to people from the neighborhoods that had the most weed-related arrests going all the way back to 1996. Eligible applicants had to make at or less than 80% of the average median income there, adjusted for household size. To qualify, you also have to have been arrested and convicted in Oakland on a cannabis-related offense in the last 20 years. It is an attempt to help some of the people who caught the very worst of the drug war.
And it sounds good, but it's still complicated, right? It doesn't help prospective weed entrepreneurs who are just above that income threshold, and so many people who are below it have other barriers to contend with, like, you have to have a state ID and proof of residence, which, as we know, poor people are less likely to have. They also have to have proof of income, and that's a problem for people like Linda Grant, who spent years selling weed in the underground economy.
Because of the documents that they're requiring to ask for, like people, they want tax returns and stuff like that. I don't have no receipts from selling weed. I haven't worked legally like that. So that's not realistic for a lot of equity applicants in the hood.
If you want to get into the legal weed business, the time to do so is essentially right now. Because on January 1st, 2023, the state of California will start handing out a new kind of license for weed growers. It's called a Type 5 license. And Type 5 licenses place no limits on the size of the cannabis farms that people can own and operate. And a lot of people in the cannabis industry are bracing for that day when they worry that the really big fish are going to start swimming into the market.
We're talking about huge companies, maybe multinational companies, industrial ag producers, big drug companies. They could crowd out the smaller players in the game who paid the steepest costs for being in this market long before it was legal.
This show being from NPR, the audio quality is understandably and expectedly top-notch. The musical transitions, blend of conversational and professional tones, in addition to the chemistry between the co-hosts combined with the entire Code Switch team's journalistic skill sets, all result in a very polished podcast. Speaking of music, one of my favorite recurring segments on the show that the show does is called Songs That Are Giving Us Life, where the co-hosts ask people that are featured in the episode what songs are giving them life right now. The Code Switch team is also unafraid to issue corrections when necessary and sometimes offer updates from folks on their stories they've done in the past with new and relevant news, both of which are qualities that I very much respect in terms of journalistic integrity.
Room for improvement.
This section is going to be pretty brief because, as I said earlier, this is a very polished podcast, and who am I to tell NPR how to do what they do? But there are a few things that are worth the mention. There are editing skips that happen within this show, similar to what I referenced in the Stuff You Should Know episode 8 of A Pod About a Pod. So what happens is when I'm listening to Code Switch, occasionally it'll repeat itself. There will be an editing error where they have spliced in the same audio again, and it just results in, a repetitive listening experience. Not a huge deal, but something that I have noticed. Another thing I came across in my research was that despite generally positive reactions to their blog, in the past there's been some controversy in the online community about how the Code Switch blog is moderated, specifically in reference to the censorship of certain offensive audience comments. And this is a couple years ago, so perhaps their moderation has straightened out, but that was something that I did read a bit about. One other point, not really a room for improvement, more of an FYI, this show can be a bit heavy to listen to. I mean, spoiler alert, it's about race, which can be a thorny subject, to say the least. So keep that in mind. A lot of the, stories might make you feel feelings that are hard to go through, but are still important to sit with and consider. So just keep in mind, it's not as whimsical of a podcast as some of the others that I've featured in the past, but it is very important and still fun. One of the things they do is that Songs Giving Us Life segment that kind of brings in the more lighthearted feelings and puts a positive, optimistic spin on things. Ultimately, the podcast is intentionally crafted and strikes a good balance that keeps me coming back and wanting to hear more. Welcome to the Peanut Gallery, aka the end of the show. Thank you for tuning in to hear what to expect, quick history, meet the talent, why it's worth it, and room for improvement about Code Switch from NPR. Right now, I want to make some administrative notes about my podcast, this podcast, A Pod About a Pod. Initially, this began as a bi-weekly quest to share the best of podcasts, and I found over the course of these 9 episodes that my process takes me a little longer than 2 weeks per show. Because I am a one-man operation with respect to writing, researching, recording, editing, and etc. right now, coupled with the fact that I am starting a new job and college is back at the end of this month, APAAP is going to switch to a monthly update schedule for now. This will give me more time to immerse myself in the next podcast I'll be featuring and conduct thorough research while also continuing to listen to new podcasts and fresh shows that are new to me, which will hopefully ensure a quality catalog as APAAP goes into the future. Another idea I'm flirting with is starting a Patreon or some other account with a service that supports content creators. And I get that it might seem counterintuitive to ask you for money while also announcing a slower update schedule, but hear me out because the thinking is the same. I want to improve your listener experience by what I can offer while starting to work toward a larger vision for A Pod About a Pod. Besides, I've never really been interested in monetizing this podcast with advertisements because, I mean, that's totally cool for the podcasts that do, but I don't really want to be telling my listeners about Blue Apron or whatever else, stamps.com. I just want to tell you guys about the podcasts that I think deserve your ears. And so this is a way that if you feel like I'm giving you quality content that you can give back and help me to continue to provide the quality that it's at and continue to increase that quality as time goes on. I recently had a socially distant coffee date with a friend of mine. Hi, Haley. I hope you made it this far and you're still listening. And we talked about our lives and everything going on in the world. Long story short, my podcast came up in conversation and I was talking about how excited I was for this episode because Code Switch has been such a valuable addition to my podcast library because a lot of the stories and conversations in the show I might not otherwise be hearing. That got us talking about how absolutely each and every one of us has a voice and stories inside us. And with podcasts having such a low economic barrier to entry, as well as such a high potential for innovative creativity, I want to help translate the change, as my friend Haley put it. The specifics of what this could look like and the action steps that will be necessary are still taking shape and forming in my head, but I'm really electrified by the conversation I had with my friend about what a bigger community-oriented project APAAP might be in the future. So stay tuned for more information about that, and feel free to let me know what you think by following A Pod About a Pod on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, and that way you can stay informed on any new developments we have going on. One way I plan on spending this longer time between episodes is posting more content on those accounts, like links to shows, memes, articles about podcasting, and other resources to enhance your APAAP experience. Another way to support the show right now is rating us and leaving a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast, because it really helps us find new people. It helps the podcast show up in the search results. So I very much appreciate you taking the time to do that. Lastly, you can email us at apodaboutapod@gmail.com with any feedback for the show or suggestions for a podcast I should check out myself. With our new schedule, the next episode is set to drop on Sunday, September 6th. And until then, happy listening.